The morning I discovered my family's true colors wasn't at a birthday party or family dinner. It was 3 days after we buried my mother, Patricia, when I walked into First National Bank of Oregon expecting to close a small checking account and walked out holding the key to a safety deposit box worth more than my childhood home. But let me start from the beginning, because what happened in that memorial hall changed everything I thought I knew about the people who raised me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The rain had been falling steadily for 3 days, which seemed fitting for Portland in November, though it felt like the sky was mourning right along with us. I stood in the kitchen of Mom's ranch house in Beaverton, watching droplets race down the window while the coffee maker gurgled behind me. The house still smelled like her lavender perfume mixed with the faint scent of the vanilla candles she burned every evening. Everything looked exactly as she'd left it the morning she went into the hospital for what was supposed to be routine surgery. I'd been the one staying here since the funeral, partly because someone needed to sort through her things, but mostly because I couldn't bear the thought of the house sitting empty just yet. My apartment in downtown Portland felt too quiet, too removed from her memory. Here, surrounded by her quilted throws and the ceramic owl collection she'd been building for 20 years, I could almost pretend she might walk through the front door any moment, asking if I'd remembered to water her African violets. The memorial service was scheduled for 2 o'clock at St. Mark's Community Center, the same place where Mom had volunteered every Thursday for the past 15 years, serving lunch to seniors who had nowhere else to go. She would have loved that detail, knowing her celebration of life was happening in a place where she'd spent so many hours caring for others. I'd chosen the venue specifically for that reason, despite my father Bob's complaints that it wasn't fancy enough, and my siblings Mike and Amanda's suggestions that we rent somewhere more impressive. I poured coffee into Mom's favorite mug, the one with faded roses that she'd had since before I was born, and tried to push away the familiar knot of anxiety that formed whenever I thought about dealing with my family. It wasn't that we didn't love each other, exactly, but there had always been an undercurrent of tension, especially when it came to money. Mom had been the buffer between us, the one who smoothed over disagreements and changed the subject when conversations got heated. Without her gentle presence, I wondered how we'd navigate the inevitable discussions about her estate. The house was small but filled with treasures she'd collected over 43 years of marriage. Her jewelry box sat on the dresser in her bedroom, overflowing with pieces that ranged from costume jewelry she'd picked up at garage sales to the diamond earrings Dad had given her for their 25th anniversary. She'd always told me stories about each piece, where it came from, why it mattered. The pearl necklace her own mother had worn to her wedding, the turquoise bracelet she'd bought herself after getting her first job outside the home, the gold locket that held tiny photos of all 4 of her children as babies. I'd spent the morning arranging flowers and setting up photo displays at the community center, working alongside Mrs. Henderson from next door and a few of Mom's volunteer friends. They'd shared stories about her kindness, her terrible jokes, her ability to remember everyone's birthday and show up with homemade cookies when someone was having a rough time. Listening to them, I felt proud to be Patricia's daughter, proud that she'd touched so many lives in quiet, meaningful ways. The service itself was beautiful. Pastor Williams spoke about Mom's faith and her commitment to serving others. Mike gave a eulogy that made everyone laugh when he told the story about Mom accidentally dyeing Dad's white shirts pink in the washing machine, and then convincing him that pale pink was actually very fashionable. Amanda sang Mom's favorite hymn in a voice that wavered with emotion but stayed strong enough to carry the melody. Even Dad, who rarely showed feelings publicly, wiped away tears when the pianist played the song Mom used to hum while cooking dinner. I spoke last, sharing memories of Saturday mornings spent in her garden, learning the names of flowers and how to coax tomatoes to grow despite Portland's unpredictable weather. I talked about her patience when I brought home stray cats as a child, her pride when I graduated college, her excitement when I got my job at the marketing firm. I tried to capture the essence of who she was beyond just being our mother, the woman who read voraciously, who could solve crossword puzzles in ink, who never missed an episode of her favorite soap opera but would never admit to anyone outside the family that she watched it. After the service, people lingered in the reception hall, sharing more stories over coffee and the sandwiches I'd ordered from Mom's favorite deli. The conversation flowed naturally, filled with laughter mixed with tears, exactly the kind of celebration Mom would have wanted. I felt grateful for the turnout, for the love that surrounded our family in that moment, for the sense that Mom's life had truly mattered to people beyond just us. It was around 4 o'clock when the crowd began to thin out, and Dad suggested we head back to the house to start going through Mom's personal belongings. The practical side of death, the part that felt almost sacrilegious but couldn't be avoided. We'd been putting off the conversation about dividing her things, but with relatives planning to head home the next day, it seemed like the right time to tackle the task together. Back at the house, we gathered in Mom's bedroom, the 5 of us who had been her whole world. Dad sat heavily on the edge of the bed where he'd slept beside her for over 4 decades, looking older than his 68 years. Mike paced by the window, always restless, always ready to get things done and move on to the next task. Amanda perched on Mom's vanity chair, fingers already reaching toward the jewelry box like she was eager to see what treasures it held. I stood near the closet, still wearing the black dress I'd chosen for the memorial, feeling like an observer in my own family. Dad cleared his throat and looked around at each of us. "Your mother would have wanted this to be fair," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "She loved all of you equally, and she'd want her things to go where they'd be appreciated." It was a reasonable start to what I knew would be a difficult conversation. Mom had never been one for expensive things, but she'd accumulated a lifetime of objects that held sentimental value, and I knew we all had different pieces that held special memories. Amanda was the first to speak up. "I think we should divide the jewelry based on who would actually wear it," she said, lifting the lid of the jewelry box and peering inside. "I mean, some of these pieces are pretty dated, and it would be a shame if they just sat in someone's drawer." She was already sorting through the contents, setting aside pieces that caught her eye. I watched her handle Mom's things with casual efficiency, as if she were shopping at a department store rather than going through our mother's most personal possessions. Mike nodded in agreement. "Makes sense. And we should think about the practical value too. Some of this stuff might be worth something, and others might just be sentimental." He picked up the diamond earrings, holding them up to the light to examine them more closely. "These are probably the most valuable pieces she had. Dad, do you remember what you paid for them?" The conversation continued in this vein for the next hour, with my siblings systematically working through Mom's jewelry box, discussing the monetary worth of each piece, and debating who had the best claim to what. They talked about Mom's rings, her bracelets.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Her necklaces, as if they were items in an estate sale rather than symbols of her life and love. Amanda claimed the pearl necklace because she said she attended more formal events than the rest of us. Mike took Dad's old wedding band, which Mom had worn on a chain around her neck after Dad upgraded to a newer ring for their anniversary. I found myself growing quieter as the division continued, not because I didn't care about having something to remember Mom by, but because the whole process felt wrong somehow. These weren't just objects to be distributed based on who could make the best use of them. They were pieces of Mom's story, each one connected to a memory, a moment, a feeling. The way my siblings discussed them, calculating their worth, and negotiating for the pieces they wanted, made my chest tighten with an emotion I couldn't quite name. When Amanda held up the turquoise bracelet and declared that she'd always admired it, I almost spoke up. Mom had bought that bracelet to celebrate getting her job at the library, her first work outside the home after years of raising children. She'd told me the story dozens of times, how proud she'd felt walking into that jewelry store and buying something beautiful just for herself, how the turquoise reminded her of her own strength and independence. But before I could say anything, the bracelet was in Amanda's pile, along with several other pieces that held similar significance. Mike was more interested in items he could easily convert to cash, though he didn't say so directly. He claimed Mom's class ring from nursing school, her gold watch, and several pieces that I suspected he'd already mentally calculated the value of. When he suggested that Dad keep the most sentimental pieces since he'd been married to her the longest, it sounded generous, but I noticed he was careful to define sentimental as items with less obvious monetary worth. Dad seemed overwhelmed by the whole process, nodding along with whatever Mike and Amanda suggested but not really engaging with the decisions. I could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of grief making it hard for him to focus on the details of who got what. He kept picking up different pieces and staring at them as if he were seeing them for the first time, his fingers trembling slightly as he handled the jewelry that had adorned the love of his life for so many years. By the time we finished, most of Mom's jewelry box had been divided between Amanda and Mike, with a few pieces set aside for Dad and almost nothing left for me. It wasn't that they deliberately excluded me exactly, but somehow in all their discussions about value and practicality, and who would wear what, my preferences had been overlooked or dismissed. When I finally asked about the gold locket, the one with our baby pictures inside, Amanda looked surprised. "Oh, I was planning to take that one too," she said as if it were obvious. "I have kids now, so it makes sense for me to have something with family photos." The logic was sound, but it stung. That locket had been one of Mom's most treasured possessions, and she'd shown it to me countless times, pointing out how tiny we'd all been, how much love she'd felt holding each of us. The idea of it disappearing into Amanda's jewelry box, rarely seen or thought about, felt like losing another piece of Mom. In the end, I left the house that evening with only 2 items, a simple silver chain that Mom had worn almost every day, and a small pair of pearl earrings that nobody else had wanted because they were slightly yellowed with age. As I drove back to my apartment through the November drizzle, I tried to tell myself that it didn't matter, that Mom's love couldn't be measured in jewelry, that having her memory was more important than having her possessions. But the hollow feeling in my chest suggested otherwise. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of unfinished business that I couldn't shake. There were still practical matters to handle, bank accounts to close, insurance policies to sort through, all the administrative details that come with losing someone. Mom had been organized about her finances, keeping all her important papers in a manila folder in her desk drawer, so I expected the process to be straightforward. I drove to First National Bank of Oregon, the small branch where Mom had done her banking for over 20 years. The staff there knew her by name, and several of them offered their condolences when I explained why I was there. I'd brought her death certificate and all the documentation I thought I'd need to close her checking account and handle any other loose ends. Mrs. Foster, the branch manager, was the one who helped me. She'd worked with Mom on various accounts over the years and spoke fondly of her, remembering how Mom always asked about her grandchildren and brought cookies during the holidays. We started with the checking account, which had a modest balance that would help cover some of the funeral expenses. There was also a small savings account that Mom had mentioned before, money she'd been setting aside for what she called a rainy day, but then Mrs. Foster pulled up Mom's full profile on her computer screen, and her expression changed. She looked at the screen, then at me, then back at the screen with a puzzled frown. "I'm showing another account here," she said slowly. "It's listed under your mother's social security number, but it has your name as the sole beneficiary, and the only person authorized to access it." I stared at her, certain there had been some mistake. "That's impossible," I said. "Mom would have told me if she had another account with my name on it." But even as I spoke, I felt a flutter of something in my chest, a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. Mrs. Foster turned her computer screen toward me, and I could see the account information displayed clearly. It was a savings account that had been opened 8 years earlier, with regular deposits made every month since then. The balance was substantial, more money than I'd ever seen in one place, certainly more than I'd expected Mom to have been able to save on her modest income from her part-time job at the library. "There's also a safety deposit box registered to this account," Mrs. Foster continued, her voice gentle but professional. "Would you like to access it? You have the legal right, as the named beneficiary, and with the death certificate, we can open it today if you'd like." I nodded, too stunned to fully process what was happening. Mrs. Foster led me through the bank to the vault area, where rows of safety deposit boxes lined the walls. She used her key and the one from Mom's file to open box number 247, sliding out the long metal container and setting it on the table in the private viewing room. Inside the box, I found documents I'd never seen before, financial statements showing the account's growth over the years, and a sealed envelope with my name written on it in Mom's careful handwriting. My hands shook as I opened the envelope and began to read the letter inside. "My dearest Jessica," it began, "if you're reading this, it means I'm gone and you've discovered my secret. I've been saving this money for you since you were 25, setting aside a little bit each month from my library job, and from small amounts your father never noticed from our household budget. I wanted you to have something that was just yours, something that came from my love for you and my pride in the woman you became." The letter continued, explaining that Mom had watched me struggle financially after college, working extra hours to make ends meet, never asking for help, even when I clearly needed it. She'd seen how my siblings had different attitudes toward money and family, how they viewed financial support as something they were entitled to rather than something to be grateful for. She'd noticed how I was always the one who gave rather than received, always the one who sacrificed my own needs for the sake of family harmony. "I know you think I never noticed the differences between you children, but a mother sees everything," the letter continued. "I saw how you worked 3 jobs to pay for college so we wouldn't have to take out loans. I saw how you sent me flowers on my birthday even when I knew you could barely afford groceries. I saw how you visited every week, not because you needed something, but because you wanted to spend time with me. This money is my way of making sure you know how much that meant to me." The final paragraph of the letter made me sit down hard in the chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me. "I've instructed the bank not to mention this account to anyone else in the family. It's not because I love them less, but because I know they wouldn't understand. They would see this as unfair, as me playing favorites, and they would make you feel guilty for accepting it. But you earned this money through 8 years of being the daughter who cared more about my heart than my wallet. Use it wisely, use it joyfully, and know that every dollar represents a moment when you chose love over convenience." I sat in that small room for nearly an hour, reading and rereading Mom's letter, trying to absorb the magnitude of what she'd done. She'd been saving for me in secret, for 8 years. She'd seen things about my siblings that I'd only sensed, understood dynamics in our family that I'd never fully acknowledged. And she'd made sure that her final gift to me couldn't be divided, negotiated, or taken away by anyone else. The account statements showed deposits that were small but consistent, never large enough to be missed from the household budget, but adding up over time to a sum that could change my life. I thought about all the times Mom had mentioned being careful with money, all the times she'd declined to join us for dinner out, or insisted she didn't need anything for her birthday. She'd been living on less, so she could save more for me, and I'd never suspected. Walking out of the bank that afternoon, I felt as if I were carrying a secret that was too big for my body to contain. The weight of Mom's love, expressed in such a practical and thoughtful way, was overwhelming. But mixed with the gratitude and amazement was a growing apprehension about what would happen when my family found out. Because they would find out eventually. Secrets this significant rarely stayed hidden forever, especially in families where money was always a source of tension. That evening, I sat in my apartment with Mom's letter spread out on my coffee table, trying to decide what to do next. Part of me wanted to tell Dad immediately, to share this incredible gift Mom had given me, and let him know about this side of her that even he hadn't fully known. But her warning about my siblings' reaction echoed in my mind, and I found myself hesitating. I thought about the jewelry division from the day before, how easily Mike and Amanda had claimed the pieces they wanted, how they discussed Mom's possessions in terms of value and utility rather than sentiment. I imagined their faces when they learned about the secret account, the questions they'd ask, the arguments they'd make about fairness and equal treatment. I could already hear Mike's voice calculating what his share should be, Amanda's indignation that Mom had kept such a secret from the rest of the family. But the money wasn't the real issue, I realized as I sat there in the growing darkness. The real revelation was what Mom had seen, what she'd understood about our family dynamics that none of us had ever talked about openly. She'd recognized that I was different from my siblings, not better or worse, but different in ways that mattered to her. She'd seen my struggles and my sacrifices, and she'd found a way to acknowledge them without creating conflict during her lifetime. The secret felt sacred somehow, this final communication between Mom and me. She'd trusted me with her observation about our family, trusted me to understand why she'd made this choice, trusted me to handle the knowledge with maturity. Breaking that trust by immediately sharing the news felt like a betrayal of her final wishes, even though keeping it secret felt like a betrayal of my family. As I finally folded the letter and put it away that night, I made the decision to wait. I would sit with this knowledge for a while, let it settle, figure out the right way to handle it. Mom had kept the secret for 8 years. I could keep it for a few days while I decided on the best path forward. Little did I know that the choice would soon be taken out of my hands entirely, and that my family's reaction would exceed even Mom's most pessimistic predictions about how they'd handle the news. The days following my discovery at the bank passed in a strange haze of normalcy mixed with profound disorientation. I went to work at the marketing firm, sat through meetings about campaign strategies and client budgets, responded to emails, and attended conference calls, all while carrying the weight of Mom's secret like a stone in my chest. My colleagues offered their condolences and asked how I was holding up, and I gave them the expected answers about grief being a process and taking things one day at a time. None of them could have imagined that beneath my composed exterior, I was grappling with a revelation that had fundamentally shifted my understanding of my own family. The letter remained folded in my purse, and I found myself touching the envelope throughout the day, reassuring myself that it was real, that I hadn't imagined the whole extraordinary experience. During lunch breaks, I would unfold it and read Mom's words again, searching for clues I might have missed, trying to absorb the full meaning of what she'd done. Each reading revealed new layers of thought and planning that had gone into her decision, new evidence of how carefully she'd observed our family dynamics over the years. At home in the evenings, I found myself replaying memories with fresh eyes, looking for the signs Mom had mentioned seeing. I remembered the Christmas when I was 26, and had quietly returned the expensive boots I'd bought for myself, so I could afford to buy nicer gifts for everyone else. I'd thought nobody noticed, but apparently Mom had seen me wearing my old worn-out shoes, and understood what I'd sacrificed. I recalled the countless times I'd declined family dinners or outings because money was tight, always making excuses about being busy with work, rather than admitting I couldn't afford the restaurants they chose, or the activities they planned. There were other memories too, more recent ones that took on new significance in light of Mom's observations. Last spring, when Mike had asked to borrow money for a down payment on his new truck, I'd seen the expectation in his eyes, the assumption that I would say yes without question. When I'd explained that I didn't have that kind of money available, he'd seemed genuinely surprised, as if he'd never considered that I might have financial limitations of my own. Amanda had reacted similarly when I couldn't contribute as much as she'd wanted toward Dad's birthday gift last year, making comments about how I must be better at managing money since I didn't have kids to support. The more I reflected on these patterns, the more I understood what Mom had seen. My siblings loved me, I didn't doubt that, but they'd somehow developed a view of our relationships that was fundamentally transactional. They measured family connection through financial gestures and material support, and when I couldn't or wouldn't participate at the level they expected, they interpreted it as selfishness rather than inability. Mom had recognized this dynamic and had quietly worked to ensure that her final gift to me couldn't be diminished by their expectations or demands. By Thursday of that week, the secret was becoming harder to carry alone. I found myself wanting to call Rachel Martinez, my neighbor and one of Mom's closest friends, who had been such a source of comfort during the funeral planning. Rachel had known Mom for over 15 years, ever since she'd moved into the house next door, and she'd often joined us for Sunday dinners, or helped with Mom's garden when arthritis made it difficult for her to do the heavy work herself. If anyone would understand the significance of what Mom had done, it would be Rachel. I called her that evening, asking if she'd like to meet for coffee the next day. There was something comforting about Rachel's presence, a steadiness that reminded me of Mom herself. She was in her early 60s, with salt and pepper hair she wore in a practical bob, and eyes that seemed to notice everything while judging nothing. When we met at the little cafe near Mom's house, the same place where Mom and Rachel had shared countless conversations over the years, I felt some of the tension in my shoulders begin to ease. Rachel ordered her usual black coffee and a blueberry muffin, settling into the booth across from me with the unhurried attention that had always made her such a good listener. She asked about work, about how I was adjusting to life without Mom's weekly phone calls, about whether I was eating enough and sleeping well. Her concern was genuine but not overwhelming, the kind of caring that creates space for honesty without demanding it. When I finally worked up the courage to tell her about the bank account, Rachel listened without interruption, her expression shifting from surprise to understanding to something that looked almost like relief. When I finished explaining about the letter and the 8 years of secret savings, she sat back in her seat and shook her head slowly. I wondered if she was going to do something like this, Rachel said, her voice quiet but certain. She talked to me about you kids sometimes, about how different you all were, about how she worried that you gave more than you received. She never mentioned any specific plan, but I could tell she was thinking about ways to balance things out. Rachel stirred her coffee thoughtfully, choosing her words with care. Your mom saw everything, Jessica. She noticed how you always made sure everyone else was taken care of first, how you never asked for help even when you clearly needed it. The validation of Mom's observations coming from Rachel felt both comforting and unsettling. It meant that the family dynamics Mom had written about weren't just in her head, or colored by maternal bias. They were real enough that an outside observer had noticed them too. Rachel had seen me struggle financially, had watched my siblings take my support for granted, had observed the imbalances that I'd tried so hard to rationalize or ignore. She also worried about what would happen after she was gone, Rachel continued. She knew Mike and Amanda would expect you to step into her role, to be the one who smoothed over conflicts and made sure everyone stayed connected. She was afraid you'd sacrifice even more of yourself trying to hold the family together, and she wanted you to have something that would give you choices instead of just obligations. This insight hit me with unexpected force. I hadn't consciously thought about inheriting Mom's role as family peacekeeper, but I could already feel the subtle pressure beginning. Dad had called twice this week, both times to ask my opinion about decisions that Mom would have handled herself. Amanda had texted about planning a family dinner for Dad's birthday next month, assuming I would help coordinate and contribute. Mike had mentioned wanting to go through more of Mom's things, suggesting we make it a family project that would obviously require my participation and organizational skills. Rachel reached across the table and squeezed my hand.
Your mom loved all of you equally, but she knew you loved differently. She saw that you were the one who would sacrifice your own happiness for everyone else's comfort, and she didn't want that to be your only option. This money she left you, it's not about favoritism, it's about freedom. The word freedom resonated in a way that surprised me. I hadn't realized how constrained I'd felt by family expectations, how much of my decision-making had been influenced by what others needed or wanted from me. The idea that Mom had recognized this pattern and had worked to give me alternatives felt like the most profound gift she could have offered, more meaningful than any amount of money. But even as I felt grateful for Rachel's understanding and support, I couldn't ignore the growing anxiety about what would happen when my family discovered the truth, because they would discover it, eventually. Financial secrets rarely stayed hidden forever, especially when lawyers and estate settlements were involved. The thought of facing Mike and Amanda's questions and accusations made my stomach churn with dread. Rachel seemed to sense my apprehension. Have you thought about what you're going to tell them? She asked gently. Because you know this won't stay secret much longer. Your dad is going to be handling estate paperwork, and there are probably other legal matters that will bring this to light. She was right, and I'd been avoiding thinking about the inevitable confrontation. Dad was already meeting with Mom's lawyer next week to discuss the will and finalize various administrative details. If there were other assets or accounts that needed to be addressed, the secret account would likely come up in those discussions. Even if it didn't, the lawyer might mention it to Dad, assuming he already knew about it. I keep going back and forth, I admitted to Rachel. Part of me wants to tell them myself, to control how they find out and try to explain Mom's reasoning. But another part of me thinks maybe it's better if they never know. Maybe I should just quietly use the money for my own life and not create family drama over something that can't be changed anyway. Rachel nodded thoughtfully. Those are both reasonable approaches, she said. But you might also consider what your mom would want you to do. She kept this secret to protect you during her lifetime, but now that she's gone, what would serve you best? What would honor both her gift and your own integrity? The question stayed with me for the rest of the weekend. I spent Saturday cleaning out Mom's closet, a task I'd been putting off because it felt too final, too much like erasing her presence from the world. As I folded her dresses and sorted through her shoes, I found myself having imaginary conversations with her, asking what she would want me to do with the knowledge she'd left me. Going through her things also gave me new insights into the person she'd been beyond just my mother. I found journals she'd kept sporadically over the years, mostly focused on gardening notes and family milestones, but occasionally revealing deeper thoughts about her hopes and worries. In an entry from 3 years ago, she'd written about watching me work extra hours to pay for car repairs, noting how I never complained but seemed tired all the time. In another entry, she'd expressed frustration about a family gathering where Mike had made assumptions about my ability to contribute to a group gift, writing that she wished she could find a way to help me without making the others feel left out. These glimpses into Mom's private thoughts confirmed that her decision about the secret account hadn't been impulsive or based on temporary observations. She'd been thinking about family dynamics and fairness for years, watching patterns play out and looking for ways to address imbalances without creating conflict. The account represented years of careful consideration and quiet sacrifice on her part, money set aside month after month, while she lived on less so I could eventually have more. Sunday evening brought an unexpected call from Dad. He sounded more energetic than he had since Mom's death, and I could hear something approaching excitement in his voice. He'd spent the day going through Mom's desk more thoroughly, he explained, and had found some papers that suggested she might have had additional assets they hadn't known about. "There are bank statements here from an account I've never seen before," Dad said. "It looks like your mother was quite a bit better at saving than I realized. I'm going to call the bank tomorrow and see what this is all about. It might mean there's more to the estate than we thought." My heart started racing as I listened to him talk about the discovery. This was it, the moment when the secret would come to light whether I was ready or not. I could tell him about the account now, explain about the letter and Mom's intentions, and try to control the narrative before he involved Mike and Amanda. Or I could stay quiet and let him discover the truth on his own, which might be easier for me, but would likely be more shocking and confusing for him. "Dad," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "about that account, I think I might know something about it. Could I come over tomorrow evening? After you've talked to the bank, I think we need to discuss this together." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could hear Dad processing the implications of my response. "You know about this account?" he asked, his tone shifting from excitement to puzzlement. "How would you know about bank accounts your mother never mentioned to me?" "It's complicated," I said, choosing my words carefully. "But yes, I found out about it earlier this week when I was handling some of her other banking business. I think Mom had reasons for keeping it private, and I want to make sure I explain those reasons properly when we talk about it." Dad agreed to wait until after his bank meeting to discuss the account further, but I could hear the confusion and hurt in his voice. The idea that Mom had kept financial secrets from him was clearly troubling, and I realized that the revelation was going to be painful for him in ways I hadn't fully considered. Not only would he learn that his wife had hidden money from him for 8 years, but he'd also have to confront her observations about their children and the family dynamics she'd been quietly managing. That night, I barely slept. I kept running through different scenarios for how the conversation might go, trying to anticipate Dad's questions and prepare explanations that would honor Mom's intentions while minimizing the hurt to everyone involved. The weight of carrying Mom's secret was becoming overwhelming, and I found myself almost relieved that the decision about when to reveal it was being taken out of my hands. Monday morning at work was torture. I couldn't concentrate on anything, constantly checking my phone to see if Dad had called with updates from the bank. I knew he had an appointment at 10 o'clock, which meant he'd probably know the full truth about the account by noon. The hours crawled by with excruciating slowness, each minute bringing me closer to a confrontation I still wasn't sure how to handle. The call came at 2:30 in the afternoon. Dad's voice was strained,
carrying a mixture of confusion, hurt, and what sounded like barely controlled anger. "Jessica, I need you to come to the house right now," he said without any of his usual pleasantries. "We need to talk about this bank account, and I want to understand exactly what you knew and when you knew it." I left work immediately, telling my supervisor that there was a family emergency that couldn't wait. The drive to Mom's house felt both endless and too short, giving me time to rehearse what I wanted to say, but not enough time to feel truly prepared. I found Dad sitting at the kitchen table, Mom's letter spread out in front of him along with bank statements and other documents from the safety deposit box. His eyes were red-rimmed, and I could see that he'd been crying. The sight of him sitting there surrounded by evidence of Mom's secret planning broke my heart. This man who had loved and trusted his wife completely for over 40 years, was now faced with proof that she'd been keeping significant secrets from him, making decisions about their children and their money without his knowledge or input. "She gave this to you," Dad said, gesturing to the letter. "It wasn't a question. She opened this account for you specifically, and she never told me. For 8 years, she was taking money out of our household budget and saving it for you, and I never knew." His voice cracked on the last words, and I could see the depth of his bewilderment and pain. I sat down across from him, trying to find words that would explain without making things worse. "Dad, she did this because she loved you, and because she loved all of us. She wasn't trying to deceive you or hurt anyone. She was trying to solve a problem she saw in our family, something she was worried about but didn't know how to address directly." "What problem?" Dad asked, his voice rising slightly. "What problem was so significant that she felt she had to hide money from me for 8 years? We talked about everything, Jessica. We made decisions together, or at least I thought we did." I took a deep breath and tried to explain Mom's observations about the family dynamics, about how she'd noticed differences in how my siblings and I approached relationships and financial support. I shared what she'd written about seeing me struggle and sacrifice, about her concerns that I gave more than I received, and her desire to balance things out. I tried to convey her love for all of us while explaining why she'd felt this particular gift needed to be kept secret. Dad listened without interrupting, but I could see the emotions playing across his face as I talked. Confusion at the idea that there were family problems he hadn't noticed. Hurt that Mom had felt unable to discuss her concerns with him. Guilt that he might have missed signs of the imbalances Mom had observed. And underneath it all, a growing anger that seemed directed not at Mom, but at the situation she'd felt compelled to address in secret. When I finished explaining, Dad sat quietly for several minutes, staring down at the documents spread across the table. Finally he looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before, something between disappointment and resignation. "Your mother was protecting you," he said slowly. "But from what? From us? From your own family?" The questions hung in the air between us, and I realized that no answer I could give would be entirely satisfactory. The truth was that Mom had been protecting me from family expectations and dynamics that Dad himself might not have fully recognized or understood. She was protecting me from having to choose between my own financial security and family harmony, I said finally. She saw that I always put everyone else's needs first, even when it meant sacrificing things I needed or wanted. She wanted me to have something that was just mine, something that couldn't be divided or debated or taken away. Dad nodded slowly, and I could see him processing this explanation, trying to reconcile it with his own understanding of our family. "And you've known about this for how long?" he asked. "Since Monday," I admitted. "I found out when I went to close her other accounts. I was going to tell you, but I wanted some time to understand what she'd done and why. I wanted to be able to explain it properly." "And Mike and Amanda?" Dad asked. "Do they know?" "No," I said. "Nobody else knows except Rachel, and I only told her because I needed someone to talk to about it." "But Dad, they're going to find out eventually." "You know they will, and when they do, it's going to be difficult." Dad rubbed his face with both hands, looking older and more tired than I'd ever seen him. "Your mother always was smarter than the rest of us," he said with a sad smile.
She probably knew exactly how this would play out, who would be upset and who would understand. She probably planned for that too. As if summoned by his words, we heard car doors slamming in the driveway. Through the kitchen window, I could see Mike's truck and Amanda's sedan parked behind my car. Dad must have called them after his bank meeting, asking them to come over for a family discussion. My stomach dropped as I realized that the conversation I'd been dreading was about to happen whether I was prepared for it or not. They deserve to know, Dad said, gathering up the papers and folding Mom's letter carefully. This affects all of us, and keeping secrets isn't going to make it easier. He paused and looked at me to regret. But Jessica, I want you to know that whatever your mother's reasons were, I think she was right to worry about you. I should have noticed the things she noticed. I should have made sure you felt supported instead of always being the one doing the supporting. Before I could respond, the front door opened and Mike's voice called out from the entryway. Your car's here, and so is Jessica's. What's this emergency meeting about? Amanda's heels clicked on the hardwood floor as they made their way toward the kitchen, and I could hear the curiosity and slight irritation in her tone. Dad and I exchanged a look that held years of unspoken understanding. Whatever happened next, we were about to find out just how well Mom had understood the family she'd loved and worried about for so many years. The secret that had been contained between the two of us for less than an hour was about to become a family crisis that would test every assumption we'd ever made about love, fairness, and what we owed each other. Mike appeared in the kitchen doorway first, his work clothes dusty and his expression curious but wary. Amanda followed close behind, her nurse's scrub suggesting she'd come straight from her shift at the hospital. They both looked tired, still processing their own grief while trying to handle the practical demands of their daily lives. The last thing they needed was another emotional upheaval, but that's exactly what they were about to get. Sit down, Dad said quietly, gesturing to the empty chairs around the kitchen table. We need to talk about your mother, and about some things she did that we're just now finding out about. His voice was steady, but I could hear the underlying strain, the weight of having to deliver news that would change how we all understood the woman who had shaped our family for so many years. Mike and Amanda exchanged glances as they sat down, and I could see them trying to read the situation from Dad's expression and the papers scattered across the table. Whatever they'd expected this meeting to be about, I was certain they hadn't anticipated learning that Mom had been keeping financial secrets that would call into question everything they thought they knew about their place in the family hierarchy. The silence stretched out for a moment as Dad organized his thoughts, and I found myself holding my breath, knowing that the next few minutes would either bring my family closer together through understanding or drive us apart through resentment and accusations. Mom's gift to me was about to become a test of whether the love that held us together was strong enough to survive the truth about how differently we'd all been seen and valued. Dad cleared his throat and began to explain what he'd discovered at the bank, his voice careful and measured as he laid out the facts about the secret account and the money Mom had been saving. I watched my siblings' faces as they processed the information, seeing confusion give way to shock, and then to something harder and more calculating, as they began to understand the implications of what they were hearing. The conversation that followed would determine not just how we'd handle Mom's final gift, but whether we'd remain a family at all. The silence that followed Dad's explanation was deafening. Mike sat perfectly still, his hands flat on the table, staring at the bank statements as if the numbers might rearrange themselves into something that made more sense. Amanda's face had gone pale, her mouth slightly open in an expression of disbelief that gradually hardened into something more calculating. I could practically see the wheels turning in both their minds as they processed not just the existence of the secret account, but the fact that I'd known about it and said nothing. Mike was the first to break the silence. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. Mom secretly saved money for 8 years, putting it in an account with only Jessica's name on it, and nobody thought to mention this to the rest of the family. His eyes moved from Dad to me, and I could see anger building behind his measured tone. "I found out a week ago," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I was going to tell everyone, but I wanted to understand what Mom was thinking first. She left a letter explaining her reasons." Amanda leaned forward, her nurse's training apparent in the way she seemed to be taking my emotional pulse while asking her questions. "A letter? What kind of reasons could possibly justify something like this? We're supposed to be a family, Jessica. Families don't keep secrets about money, especially not this kind of money." Dad handed Amanda the letter, and I watched her face change as she read Mom's words. The hurt was immediate and unmistakable, but underneath it I could see something else growing, a kind of indignation that seemed to fuel itself with each paragraph. When she finished reading, she passed the letter to Mike without saying a word, but her hands were shaking slightly. Mike read more slowly, his expression growing darker with each line. When he reached the part about Mom's observations regarding our different approaches to family relationships, he looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before, something between betrayal and disgust. "This is unbelievable," he said, his voice rising. "Mom basically wrote a character assassination of her own children, and then used it to justify playing favorites. According to this, you're some kind of saint who sacrifices everything for the family, while Amanda and I are just greedy parasites who only care about money." "That's not what she wrote," I protested. But even as I said it, I could understand how they might interpret Mom's observations that way. She wasn't saying you were bad people. She was saying that we all relate to family differently, and she wanted to make sure I had some security, because she noticed I tended to put everyone else's needs first. Amanda slammed her hand on the table, making everyone jump. "Don't you dare try to spin this as some noble gesture," she snapped. "This is about Mom deciding that you were her favorite child, and finding a way to give you special treatment, while making the rest of us feel like we were lacking in some way. Do you have any idea how this makes me feel? How it makes us feel to find out that our own mother was judging us and finding us wanting?" The pain in Amanda's voice was real, and it cut through me like a knife. This was exactly what Mom had been trying to avoid, the hurt and division that would come from her children learning about her private concerns regarding family dynamics. But now that the secret was out, there was no way to soften the blow, or make her observations seem less like judgments. "She loved all of you equally," Dad said, his voice firm but weary. "Whatever else this letter says, that much is absolutely clear. Your mother agonized over decisions like what to get each of you for Christmas, because she wanted everything to be fair and equal. This account doesn't change that, doesn't it?" Mike challenged. "Because it seems to me like Mom decided Jessica was worth $47,000 more than the rest of us. That doesn't sound very equal to me." The number hit me like a physical blow. $47,000. In the shock of discovering the account, and reading Mom's letter, I hadn't fully processed the actual amount involved. It was more money than I'd ever dreamed of having at one time, enough to pay off my student loans, buy a decent car, maybe even put a down payment on a small house. It was life-changing money, and I could see in my siblings' faces that they understood exactly what it represented. "This has to be divided equally," Amanda said, her voice taking on the authoritative tone she used at work when dealing with difficult patients or doctors. "I don't care what Mom's letter says about her reasons. You can't just give one child a massive inheritance and leave the others with nothing. It's not legal, it's not fair, and it's not what Mom would have really wanted if she'd thought it through properly." "Actually, it is legal," Dad said quietly. "I checked with the bank. The account was set up properly, with Jessica as the sole beneficiary. Your mother had every right to do this, whether we like it or not." The legal reality of the situation seemed to hit Mike and Amanda simultaneously. This wasn't a mistake that could be corrected, or a misunderstanding that could be resolved through family discussion. Mom had deliberately and methodically created a financial arrangement that excluded them, and there was nothing they could do to change it. "So that's it." Mike's voice was bitter now, all pretense of calm discussion abandoned.
We're just supposed to accept that Mom thought so little of us that she felt the need to secretly reward Jessica for being the good daughter, while the rest of us got nothing. You didn't get nothing, I said, immediately regretting the words as soon as they left my mouth. You got most of her jewelry, and there's still the house and her other assets to consider. Amanda laughed, but there was no humor in it. Oh, you mean the costume jewelry and sentimental pieces that aren't worth a fraction of what you just inherited. How generous of you to point that out. The conversation was spiraling into exactly the kind of conflict Mom had been trying to avoid, and I could see the pain in Dad's eyes as he watched his children turn on each other in the wake of their mother's death. This was supposed to be a time for coming together, for supporting each other through grief, not for discovering divisions that had apparently existed for years, without any of us fully acknowledging them. Look, I said, trying to find some middle ground, I understand why you're upset. I really do. If I were in your position, I'd probably feel the same way, but fighting about this isn't going to change what Mom did, or bring her back to explain her reasoning. Maybe we should take some time to process this before we say things we'll regret. Process what exactly? Mike demanded. Process the fact that our mother secretly judged us for years, and decided we weren't worthy of her special consideration. Process the fact that you knew about this for a week and let us sit here thinking we were all equal in her eyes. There's nothing to process, Jessica. The damage is done. Dad stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. That's enough, he said, his voice carrying more authority than I'd heard from him since Mom's death. I will not sit here and listen to you tear each other apart in your mother's kitchen. She would be heartbroken to see this conversation, and you all know it. She should have thought about that before she decided to play favorites with her children, Amanda said, but her voice had lost some of its edge. Dad's rebuke had clearly affected her, reminding her that they were having this argument in the same room, where Mom had cooked thousands of family meals and mediated countless smaller disputes. Your mother made this decision because she was worried about Jessica. Dad continued. Maybe she was right to worry, maybe she wasn't. Maybe her solution was perfect, maybe it wasn't. But she made it out of love, and she made it after years of careful observation and consideration. The least we can do is try to understand her perspective, instead of immediately assuming the worst. Mike shook his head, still looking angry but now with a layer of exhaustion underneath. I can't do this right now, he said, pushing back from the table. I need to think about this, and I need to not be in the same room with people who apparently think I'm some kind of selfish user, who only cares about money. Nobody said that. I called after him as he headed for the door, but he didn't respond. A moment later, we heard his truck start up and pull out of the driveway with more force than necessary. Amanda sat quietly for a moment, staring at Mom's letter, which had ended up back in front of her during the argument. When she finally looked up, her eyes were bright with unshed tears, and I could see that underneath the anger was a deep hurt that went beyond just the money. She really saw us this way, Amanda said softly. She really thought Mike and I were taking advantage of you, that we didn't appreciate what you did for the family. That hurts more than the money, Jessica. It hurts to know that Mom died, thinking I was some kind of ungrateful daughter, who only valued her for what she could give me. The vulnerability in Amanda's voice broke through my own defensive anger, and I felt a rush of sympathy for her pain. She was right that Mom's letter contained implicit criticisms of how she and Mike approached family relationships, and learning about those observations after Mom's death, when there was no opportunity for discussion or explanation, had to be devastating. I don't think she saw you as ungrateful, I said carefully. I think she saw differences in how we all express love and commitment, and she was worried that those differences were creating imbalances that might hurt me in the long run. But that doesn't mean she loved you any less, or thought less of you as people. Amanda wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Easy for you to say.
Reached over and patted my hand. You don't have anything to apologize for, he said. Your mother made this choice, and she made it for reasons that seemed important to her. You didn't ask for this situation, and you certainly didn't ask for the position it's put you in with your siblings. But maybe I should have handled it differently, I said. Maybe I should have told everyone right away, or found a way to share the money even if that wasn't what Mom intended. Maybe Dad agreed. But maybe your mother knew this would be difficult no matter how it was handled. Maybe she decided that protecting you was worth the risk of temporary family conflict. The word temporary hung in the air between us, both of us hoping it was accurate but neither entirely convinced. The hurt I'd seen in Mike and Amanda's eyes went deep, touching on fundamental questions about their worth and their place in Mom's affections. Those kinds of wounds didn't heal quickly, especially when they were inflicted by someone who was no longer alive to provide comfort or clarification. "What do you think I should do?" I asked Dad, genuinely wanting his guidance. He was quiet for a long moment, staring out the kitchen window at Mom's garden, where the last of the autumn flowers were still blooming despite the recent frost. "I think you should honor your mother's wishes," he said. Finally, she put a lot of thought into this decision, and she was the smartest, most caring person I ever knew. If she thought this was the right thing to do, then maybe we should trust her judgment, even if we don't fully understand it. But what about Mike and Amanda? What if they never forgive me for accepting this? Dad sighed deeply. "Your siblings are hurt right now, and they have a right to their feelings, but they're also adults who are capable of growth and understanding. Give them time to process this, give them space to work through their emotions, and trust that the love that's held this family together for all these years is stronger than money or wounded pride." His faith in the fundamental strength of our family bonds was touching, but I wasn't sure I shared his optimism. The things that had been said in the last hour couldn't be unsaid, and the knowledge that Mom had been secretly observing and judging family dynamics for years would be difficult for any of us to forget. Over the next few days, the silence from Mike and Amanda was deafening. My calls went straight to voicemail, my texts were left unread, and when I drove by Amanda's house hoping to talk things through, her car was gone despite her being scheduled for a day off from the hospital. The isolation felt intentional and complete, a coordinated effort to make me understand the consequences of accepting Mom's gift. The ostracism extended beyond just my siblings. Amanda's husband, who had always been friendly at family gatherings, walked past me in the grocery store as if I were invisible. Mike's teenage daughter, my niece Sarah, who usually texted me funny memes and updates about her high school drama, suddenly stopped all communication. It was as if I'd been quietly removed from the family roster, written out of the daily connections that had defined my social world for years. Dad tried to mediate, calling both Mike and Amanda to encourage them to at least talk to me, but his efforts were met with polite deflection. They weren't ready to discuss the situation. They needed more time to process. They would reach out when they felt able to have a productive conversation. The responses were reasonable on the surface, but felt like stalling tactics designed to maintain their distance while making me suffer for my perceived betrayal. Work became my refuge during this period, the one place where I could focus on something other than the family crisis that seemed to consume every other aspect of my life. My colleagues noticed that I seemed distracted and asked if I was still struggling with grief over Mom's death, and I let them assume that was the primary source of my stress. It was easier than trying to explain the complex web of family dynamics and secret inheritances that had turned my world upside down. Rachel called several times during this period, checking on how I was handling the fallout from revealing the secret account. Her support was invaluable, providing a perspective from someone who had known our family for years, but wasn't emotionally invested in the outcome. She reminded me that Mom's decision had been made with careful consideration, that the hurt my siblings were feeling was real but not necessarily permanent, and that I had every right to accept a gift that was legally and morally mine. "Your mother knew this would be difficult," Rachel told me during one of our coffee meetings. She wrote about it in that letter, how she was worried about their reaction, but felt this was important enough to risk it. She was protecting you not just financially, but from a lifetime of feeling obligated to sacrifice your own security for family harmony.
The wisdom in Rachel's words helped, but it didn't make the practical reality any easier. I was facing the possibility of permanently losing relationships with people I loved because I'd accepted money that was rightfully mine. The irony wasn't lost on me that Mom's gift, intended to provide me with choices and freedom, had instead created a situation where every choice felt like a loss. 2 weeks after the confrontation in Mom's kitchen, I made a decision that surprised even me. I called the bank and set up an appointment to discuss options for the account Mom had established. If my family couldn't get past the fact that I'd been singled out for special treatment, then maybe I needed to find a way to eliminate that advantage, even if it meant going against Mom's explicit wishes. The bank representative, Mrs. Foster, was the same woman who had helped me discover the account in the first place. She listened patiently as I explained my family's situation and my desire to find a way to share the inheritance more equally among Mom's children. Her expression was sympathetic but professional as she outlined the various options available to me. I could withdraw the money and distribute it myself, though that would have significant tax implications and wouldn't change the fundamental fact that Mom had chosen to give it to me specifically. I could set up a family trust that would benefit all of Mom's children equally, but again, that would be my choice rather than Mom's intention. Or I could simply leave the money where it was and continue to follow Mom's wishes, accepting both the gift and the family consequences that came with it. As Mrs. Foster explained each option, I found myself thinking about what Mom would want me to do in this situation. She'd been worried about my tendency to sacrifice my own needs for family harmony, and here I was, seriously considering giving away a life-changing sum of money to avoid conflict with my siblings. Was that exactly the kind of pattern she'd been trying to break? Or was it a reasonable compromise that would preserve relationships she also valued? The decision was made more complicated by a conversation I had with Dad that evening. He'd been going through more of Mom's papers and had found additional evidence of her careful financial planning over the years. There were records of small gifts she'd given to Mike and Amanda that I'd never known about, help with down payments and car purchases and medical bills that she'd provided quietly and without fanfare. Your mother was always trying to balance things out, Dad explained as we looked through the records together. She gave Mike money for his truck down payment 3 years ago, and she helped Amanda with her nursing school loans before that. She was constantly trying to make sure everyone was taken care of according to their needs and circumstances. This new information cast Mom's secret account in a different light. It wasn't that she decided I was her favorite child, or that she judged my siblings and found them wanting. It was that she'd been quietly managing family finances for years, providing support where she saw it was needed while trying to maintain the appearance of equal treatment. The account she'd set up for me was just the most visible and substantial example of a pattern that had been going on for much longer. Why didn't anyone tell me about the help she gave Mike and Amanda? I asked Dad. Because she asked us not to. He said simply, she didn't want you to feel left out, or to think that she was playing favorites. She was trying to help everyone according to their individual situations without creating resentment or jealousy. The irony was overwhelming. Mom had spent years secretly helping my siblings with their financial needs, while also secretly saving money for me, all in an effort to maintain family harmony and avoid the exact kind of conflict that had erupted anyway. Her attempts to manage our relationships and provide equal support had backfired spectacularly, creating the very divisions she'd been trying to prevent. Armed with this new understanding, I decided to reach out to Mike and Amanda one more time. I sent them both a text message asking if they'd be willing to meet with Dad and me to discuss some additional information about Mom's financial decisions over the years. I didn't want to reveal the details over text, but I wanted them to know that there was more to the story than what they'd learned during our kitchen confrontation. Amanda was the first to respond, agreeing to meet but making it clear that she wasn't ready to forgive or forget what had happened. Mike took longer to reply, and when he did, his message was terse and non-committal. He'd think about it, he said. But he wasn't ready to pretend that everything was okay just because there might be additional information to consider. The meeting was scheduled for the following Sunday at Mom's house, the same kitchen where we'd had our explosive confrontation 2 weeks earlier. As I prepared for what might be our last chance to repair the damage that had been done, I found myself wondering what Mom would think about the situation she'd created. Had she anticipated that her attempts to provide equal but individualized support would eventually come to light and cause exactly this kind of family crisis? Or had she been operating on the hope that her children would be mature enough to understand that love and support could take different forms without representing favoritism or judgment? The questions were unanswerable now, but they weighed heavily on my mind as I prepared to make one final attempt to preserve the family relationships that had always been the most important thing in my life, even more important than the money that was now threatening to destroy them. Sunday arrived with a crisp November morning that reminded me of the day we'd buried Mom just 3 weeks earlier. The trees in her front yard had lost most of their leaves, creating a carpet of gold and brown that crunched under my feet as I walked to the front door. I'd arrived early, wanting some time alone in the house before facing what might be our family's final attempt at reconciliation. The kitchen still smelled faintly of the coffee Dad had made earlier, and Mom's ceramic owl collection watched over the room with their painted eyes, silent witnesses to all the conversations this space had hosted over the years. I arranged the financial documents Dad had found on the table, organizing them chronologically to tell the story of Mom's quiet financial management over the past decade. Each bank statement and canceled check represented a moment when she'd seen a need and filled it, always with the caveat that the recipient shouldn't mention it to the others. Dad arrived next, carrying a manila folder thick with additional papers he'd discovered in Mom's desk. His face looked drawn, and I could see that the past 2 weeks of family tension had aged him considerably. He'd been caught in the middle of our conflict, trying to maintain relationships with all of his children while honoring his wife's final wishes. The stress was written in the new lines around his eyes, and the way his shoulders seemed to carry invisible weight. "I found more last night," he said quietly, setting the folder on the table. "Your mother kept meticulous records of every financial gift or loan she made to any of you over the years. There's documentation going back to when Mike first moved out on his own and needed help with security deposits for his apartment." We spent the next 20 minutes reviewing the papers together, and the scope of Mom's financial support became clearer with each document. She'd helped Mike through 3 different job transitions, providing bridge loans when work was scarce and quietly paying for car repairs when his old truck broke down. She'd covered Amanda's certification fees for nursing specialties, contributed to her children's school expenses when money was tight, and even paid for family vacation rentals so Amanda's family could join larger gatherings without financial strain. The pattern that emerged was one of a mother who had been acutely aware of each child's financial circumstances and had tailored her support accordingly. Mike, with his variable income from construction work, had received help during slow periods and emergencies. Amanda, with steady nursing income but the expenses of raising 2 children, had gotten assistance with kid-related costs and educational investments. And I, with stable employment but lower overall income and no family to share expenses with, had received the long-term savings account that could provide security and opportunities. "She was trying to give each of you what you needed most," Dad said as we finished organizing the documents. "Mike needed stability during uncertain times. Amanda needed help with the extra costs of raising kids, and you needed long-term security because you didn't have anyone else to fall back on." The sound of car doors slamming in the driveway interrupted our conversation. Through the window, I could see both Mike and Amanda getting out of their vehicles, their body language tense and guarded. They didn't speak to each other as they walked toward the house, and I realized that the conflict over Mom's secret account had created divisions between them as well as with me. Mike entered first, nodding curtly at Dad and me, but avoiding direct eye contact. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes that suggested he'd been sleeping poorly. Amanda followed a moment later, her nurse's professionalism evident in the way she took in the room and assessed the situation before choosing a seat that kept the table between us. "Thank you for coming," Dad said, settling into his usual chair at the head of the table. "I know this is difficult for everyone, but there are some things about your mother's financial decisions that I think you need to understand before we let this situation tear our family apart permanently." "What's to understand?" Mike asked, his voice flat. "Mom had a secret bank account for Jessica that none of the rest of us knew about. She kept it hidden for 8 years, while apparently judging the rest of us for not being good enough children to deserve the same treatment." "That's not what happened," Dad said firmly, "and I have proof." He gestured to the documents spread across the table. "Your mother was helping all of you financially, just in different ways and at different times. She never stopped caring about any of you or supporting you when you needed it." Amanda leaned forward, her eyes scanning the papers with the analytical attention she brought to medical charts. "What kind of proof?" Dad handed her a folder containing records of the financial support Mom had provided over the years: bank statements, canceled checks, loan documents. "Your mother kept detailed records of every bit of financial help she gave to any of her children, along with notes about why she felt each type of support was needed." As Amanda began reading through the documents, I watched her expression change from skepticism to surprise to something approaching understanding. Mike remained stubbornly resistant, crossing his arms and refusing to look at the papers, but I could see his curiosity fighting with his anger. "She paid for Brandon's summer camp 3 years in a row," Amanda said slowly, referring to her older son. "I thought that was just a grandmother gift, but according to this, she was specifically worried about him not having enrichment activities because money was tight after David lost his job. And she covered your truck payment for 4 months when the construction industry slowed down in 2019, Dad said to Mike. "You thought it was a loan, but she never intended for you to pay it back. She just wanted you to have reliable transportation so you could look for work." Mike finally looked at the documents, his resistance cracking as he saw the evidence of Mom's consistent care and support. "She told me that was just a temporary loan between family members," he said, his voice softer than it had been since he arrived. "Because she didn't want you to feel like charity cases," Dad explained. "She wanted you to maintain your dignity and independence while still getting the help you needed. She was trying to support all of you without making anyone feel lesser or dependent." The revelation of Mom's broader pattern of financial support began to shift the dynamic in the room. The anger and resentment that had dominated our previous conversation was being replaced by a more complex understanding of how our mother had tried to manage family relationships and individual needs. But I could see that Mike and Amanda were still struggling with the implications of her secret observations about our different approaches to family obligations. "This still doesn't explain why she felt the need to write that letter about Jessica being more giving than the rest of us," Amanda said, though her tone was less accusatory than it had been 2 weeks earlier. "Even if she was helping all of us, she clearly saw differences in our character that made her think Jessica deserved special recognition." I took a deep breath, knowing that this was the moment when I needed to address the heart of their hurt directly. "I think Mom was worried about patterns she saw developing in our family, not judging your character as people. She noticed that I had trouble asking for help or accepting support, even when I clearly needed it. She was concerned that I would sacrifice my own financial security to maintain family relationships. Like what you were planning to do with the inheritance," Dad added quietly. "Jessica came to me last week, talking about giving up the money to avoid family conflict. Your mother would have seen that as exactly the kind of self-sacrifice she was trying to prevent." Mike looked surprised. "You were going to give up the money?" "I was considering it," I admitted. "I hated the idea that Mom's gift was causing so much pain and division in our family. I thought maybe if I shared it equally among all of us, we could get past this and go back to normal. But that would have been going against Mom's explicit wishes," Amanda said, her analytical mind working through the implications. "She specifically set that account up for you alone, with legal documentation to make sure it couldn't be divided or contested." "Exactly," Dad said. Your mother knew Jessica well enough to predict that she might try to give away the inheritance to keep peace in the family. She structured the account and wrote that letter specifically to prevent that from happening. She wanted Jessica to have something that was unquestionably hers, something that couldn't be shared away or sacrificed for other people's comfort. The conversation continued for nearly 2 hours as we worked through the emotions and misunderstandings that had built up over the past weeks. Mike and Amanda began to see that Mom's secret account wasn't about favoritism or judgment, but about her recognition that I had different needs and challenges than they did. They'd both received substantial help from Mom over the years, just in forms that were immediate and practical rather than long-term and investment-oriented. Amanda was the first to acknowledge the shift in her understanding. I can see now that Mom was trying to take care of all of us in ways that fit our individual situations, she said. I still wish she had been more open about it, but I understand why she thought secrecy was necessary. Mike took longer to come around, still struggling with the idea that Mom had been observing and analyzing family dynamics for years, without sharing her concerns directly. I just hate the idea that she was worried about us taking advantage of Jessica, he said. It makes me feel like I failed somehow as a brother. You didn't fail, I said, reaching across the table to touch his hand. Mom wasn't criticizing how you treated me. She was worried about how I treated myself, how I had trouble accepting that I deserved support and security just as much as anyone else in the family. The breakthrough came when Dad shared one final document he'd found, a note Mom had written to herself just a few months before her death. In it, she'd expressed her hopes that the secret account would give me confidence to pursue opportunities I might otherwise pass up due to financial concerns. She'd specifically mentioned her dream that I might use the money to travel, take classes, or even start a business, things she'd noticed me talking about but never seriously considering because of cost. She wanted you to have adventures, Amanda said, reading the note with tears in her eyes. She wanted you to stop being so practical and responsible all the time and actually do something just for yourself. The idea that Mom's gift was about enabling dreams rather than just providing security resonated with all of us in a way that the earlier discussions about fairness and family dynamics hadn't. It reframed the inheritance from a judgment on our relative worth as children to an investment in my potential for happiness and fulfillment. As the afternoon wore on, we began to plan how to move forward as a family. The trust between us had been damaged but not destroyed, and we were all committed to rebuilding relationships that had been strained by grief, shock, and misunderstanding. Mike and Amanda acknowledged that their initial reaction had been influenced by their own pain over losing Mom, which had made them more sensitive to any suggestion that they'd disappointed her in some way. We agreed to restart our regular family gatherings, beginning with Thanksgiving dinner at Dad's house. I promised to be more open about my own struggles and needs, to ask for help when I needed it, instead of always trying to handle everything alone. Mike and Amanda committed to being more aware of the dynamics Mom had observed, to make sure I felt valued for more than just what I could provide for others. The conversation about the money itself was resolved more easily than I'd expected. Mike and Amanda accepted that Mom's intention had been clear and legally binding, and they no longer wanted me to feel guilty about accepting her gift. They encouraged me to use it in ways that would have made Mom proud, to take some of the risks and pursue some of the dreams that financial insecurity had prevented me from considering. 3 months later, I was sitting on a beach in Costa Rica, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. The trip was something I'd dreamed about for years, but had never thought I could afford. Using part of Mom's inheritance to pay for a month-long adventure in Central America had felt scary and indulgent at first, but as I sat there listening to the waves, I could almost hear her voice telling me this was exactly what she'd hoped for. I'd quit my job at the marketing firm before leaving for Costa Rica, finally ready to take the risk of starting my own consulting business. The remaining money from Mom's account was providing the financial cushion I needed to build something of my own, instead of just working to pay bills and support others. For the first time in my adult life, I was making decisions based on what I wanted rather than what others needed from me. The family relationships that had been so damaged by the revelation of Mom's secret were healing slowly but steadily. Mike had called me twice while I was traveling, not to ask for anything but just to check in and hear about my adventures. Amanda had sent photos of her kids doing well in school, some of which had been enabled by the educational support Mom had quietly provided over the years. Dad was doing better too, finding ways to honor Mom's memory while building his own independent life. He'd started volunteering at the community center where Mom's memorial service had been held, continuing her tradition of service in his own way. We talked every week, and I could hear growing peace in his voice as he adjusted to life without the woman who had been his partner and anchor for over 40 years. The secret account that had initially threatened to destroy our family had ultimately taught us important lessons about love, support, and the different ways people express care for each other. Mom's observations about our family dynamics had been accurate, but her solution hadn't been about judgment or favoritism. It had been about ensuring that each of her children had what they needed to thrive, even if those needs were different and required different approaches. Rachel continued to be a source of wisdom and support, often sharing stories about conversations she'd had with Mom over the years.
Now sits in a place of honor in my new apartment, a small reminder of the woman who saw me clearly enough to know what I needed and loved me enough to provide it. The simple silver chain and pearl earrings aren't worth much financially, but they represent something priceless: a mother's understanding and a family's capacity for growth and forgiveness. Mom's secret account wasn't really about money at all. It was about recognizing that people need different kinds of support at different times in their lives, and that true generosity sometimes requires making difficult choices that others might not immediately understand. She gave all of her children what they needed most, just in different forms and at different times, always with the goal of helping us become the best versions of ourselves. The family crisis that had seemed so devastating in those first weeks after the revelation ultimately brought us closer together. We learned to communicate more openly about our needs and struggles, to support each other without keeping score, and to appreciate the different ways we each contribute to our family's well-being. Most importantly, we learned that Mom's love had been big enough to encompass all of our differences and generous enough to provide what each of us needed, even when we didn't realize we needed it. 6 months after discovering the secret account, I was running a successful consulting business, traveling regularly, and maintaining stronger relationships with my family than I'd had in years. The money had provided practical opportunities, but the real gift had been Mom's belief that I deserved to prioritize my own happiness and success. That confidence had changed everything, giving me permission to build a life that was authentically mine, rather than just a response to other people's expectations. The memorial service that had begun this journey had been intended as a celebration of Mom's life and impact, but it had become something more: the beginning of a new chapter for all of us. Her final gift hadn't just been financial security, it had been the knowledge that she'd seen and valued each of us exactly as we were, and the encouragement to become everything we could be. In the end, that was worth more than any amount of money could ever be. The knock on my apartment door came at 8:30 on a Tuesday evening, 3 months after I'd returned from Costa Rica. I wasn't expecting anyone, and the tentative nature of the sound made me curious rather than concerned. When I opened the door, I found a young woman I didn't recognize, probably in her early 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and nervous energy radiating from her slight frame. "Are you Jessica Hamilton?" she asked, clutching a worn envelope in her hands. "Patricia Hamilton's daughter?" "Yes," I said, immediately alert. "Who are you?" "My name is Sarah Chen," she said, and I noticed her hands were trembling slightly. "I know this is going to sound strange, but your mother helped me through college. I just graduated last month, and I've been trying to figure out how to thank her properly, but then I found out she passed away." I stared at the young woman, processing this unexpected information. "My mother helped you through college? I'm sorry, but I don't understand. How did you know her?"
Sarah's face flushed slightly. She didn't know me personally. I received an anonymous scholarship that covered my entire tuition and living expenses for 4 years. The lawyer who administered it finally told me last week that the donor was Patricia Hamilton, and he gave me your address. I wanted to meet her family and explain how much her generosity meant to me. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Another secret, another layer of Mom's financial activities that none of us had known about. I invited Sarah inside, my mind reeling with questions about how many other surprises might still be waiting to surface from Mom's carefully hidden acts of generosity. Sarah sat nervously on my couch, still holding the envelope, and began to tell me her story. She'd grown up in foster care, aging out of the system at 18 with no family support and limited resources for higher education. Despite excellent grades and test scores, the financial barriers to college had seemed insurmountable until she'd received notification of a full scholarship from something called the Patricia Hamilton Educational Foundation. The scholarship covered everything, Sarah explained, her voice thick with emotion. Tuition, books, housing, even a monthly stipend for food and personal expenses. Without it, I never would have been able to go to college at all. I would have ended up working minimum wage jobs for the rest of my life. What did you study? I asked, still trying to absorb the magnitude of what Mom had done. Computer science, Sarah said with a proud smile. I just got hired as a software developer at a tech company downtown. The starting salary is more than I ever dreamed I could earn, and it's all because your mother believed in supporting education for kids who had no other options. Sarah handed me the envelope she'd been holding. I wrote her a letter every year, thanking her for the scholarship and updating her on my progress. The lawyer told me she read every one and kept them all in a file. He thought you might want to have them. Inside the envelope were 4 letters, each one written in careful handwriting that grew more confident and mature with each passing year. The first letter was from an 18-year-old girl, overwhelmed with gratitude and determination to prove herself worthy of such an incredible gift. The final letter was from a confident young woman about to graduate with honors and begin a career that would provide financial security she'd never known. As I read through Sarah's letters, I felt a familiar mixture of pride and bewilderment at discovering yet another dimension of Mom's secret generosity. She'd been supporting not just her own children in various ways, but also complete strangers who needed opportunities that money could provide. The scope of her giving was far broader than any of us had imagined. Did you know about other scholarship recipients? I asked Sarah. The lawyer mentioned there were several over the years, she said. Apparently your mother established the foundation about 10 years ago and supported 1 or 2 students each year. She specifically chose kids from foster care or other difficult situations who had academic potential but no financial resources. 10 years of secret scholarships, on top of the financial support she'd been providing to her own children, on top of the account she'd been building for me. I was beginning to understand that Mom's financial activities had been far more extensive and complex than any of us had realized. She'd been operating as a one-woman charitable foundation while maintaining the appearance of living on a modest fixed income. Sarah stayed for nearly 2 hours, sharing stories about her college experience and the career opportunities that were now opening up for her. She spoke about Mom with the reverence typically reserved for family members, describing her as the guardian angel who had made everything else possible. When she finally left, she hugged me tightly and made me promise to let her know if there was ever anything she could do to help our family in return. The next morning, I called the lawyer Sarah had mentioned, a man named Thomas Wright, who had apparently been administering Mom's educational foundation since its inception. His office was in downtown Portland, in a building I'd passed countless times without knowing it housed the administrative center for my mother's secret philanthropy. Mr. Wright was a gentle man in his 60s who spoke about Mom with obvious respect and affection. He explained that she'd contacted him 10 years earlier about setting up a small private foundation that could provide educational scholarships to deserving students with limited resources. The foundation had been funded entirely by Mom's careful savings and investments, money she'd accumulated through decades of frugal living and smart financial decisions. Your mother was remarkably sophisticated in her approach, Mr. Wright explained as he showed me the foundation's records. She understood that simply giving money wasn't enough. She wanted to ensure that recipients had ongoing support throughout their college years, so the scholarships included mentoring services and emergency assistance for unexpected expenses. The foundation's files contained thank you letters from 8 different students over the years, young people who had gone on to become teachers, nurses, engineers, and social workers. Each scholarship had been life-changing, providing opportunities that would never have existed otherwise. The cumulative impact of Mom's giving was staggering when I considered how many lives had been transformed by her quiet generosity. Did she ever meet any of the recipients? I asked. Occasionally, Mr. Wright said with a slight smile. She would sometimes attend graduation ceremonies or academic award ceremonies where her scholarship recipients were being honored. She was incredibly proud of their achievements, though she always insisted on maintaining her anonymity. I thought about all the times Mom had mentioned attending various events around town, graduations and academic ceremonies that I'd assumed were just social activities or community involvement. She'd actually been going to watch the students she was supporting achieve the milestones that her scholarships had made possible. The foundation still had a substantial endowment, enough to continue providing scholarships for several more years. Mr. Wright explained that Mom had designated me as the successor trustee in the event of her death, giving me the authority to continue or modify the scholarship program according to my own judgment and values. She hoped you would want to continue her work, he said, handing me a sealed letter with my name written in Mom's familiar handwriting. But she also made it clear that you should feel free to redirect the foundation's mission if you had different philanthropic interests. The letter was shorter than the one she'd left with the bank account, but equally moving in its clarity and thoughtfulness. She explained that the foundation had been one of her greatest sources of joy and fulfillment, a way to make a lasting difference in the world, while honoring her belief in the transformative power of education. She'd chosen to focus on foster care alumni because she understood how difficult it was to build a successful life without family support and financial resources. I know you understand what it means to work hard for everything you achieve, the letter read. You also understand what it's like to worry about money and to sometimes go without things you need. These students face even greater challenges, but they have the same dreams and potential as anyone else. I hope you'll consider continuing to support them, but I'll understand if you choose a different path. The request was gentle but compelling, and I found myself thinking about my own college experience, the scholarships and part-time jobs that had made my education possible. The idea of providing similar opportunities to students who faced even greater obstacles resonated deeply with my own values and experiences. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into learning about the foundation's operations and meeting with some of the current scholarship recipients. Each student had a unique story, but they all shared a combination of academic ambition and financial need that reminded me of my younger self. Their gratitude was overwhelming, and their determination to succeed was inspiring. One student, Marcus, was studying to become a teacher despite having grown up in 7 different foster homes. Another, Elena, was pursuing a nursing degree while working nights to support herself. Their stories reminded me that the financial security Mom had provided me was a luxury that many young people could only dream of having. I decided to continue the foundation's work, but with some modifications that reflected both Mom's original vision and my own evolving understanding of how money could be used to create positive change. In addition to the traditional scholarships, I established a program that provided emergency financial assistance to students facing unexpected crises that might force them to drop out of school. The inheritance that had initially caused so much family conflict was now being used to expand Mom's legacy of quiet generosity. Part of the money I'd received was invested to grow the foundation's endowment, ensuring that scholarships could continue indefinitely. The rest was being used to fund my new consulting business, which specialized in helping nonprofit organizations improve their fundraising and operations. The integration of Mom's gift with her existing philanthropic work felt like the perfect way to honor both her memory and her intentions. She'd given me financial security and the freedom to pursue my own dreams, and I was using that freedom to continue the work that had brought her so much satisfaction during her lifetime. 6 months after Sarah's unexpected visit, I organized the Foundation's first annual scholarship reception, an event where current and former recipients could meet each other and share their experiences. The gathering was held at the community center where Mom's memorial service had taken place, creating a full-circle moment that felt deeply meaningful. Dad attended the reception, along with Mike and Amanda, who were finally getting to see the full scope of Mom's giving and its impact on the broader community. Watching them interact with the scholarship recipients, hearing the stories of transformation and opportunity that Mom's generosity had made possible, seemed to complete their understanding of who she had been as a person. "She never told us about any of this," Amanda said quietly as we watched Marcus, the future teacher, animatedly discussing his education classes with a group of younger students. "She was funding an entire scholarship program while we thought she was just getting by on her library salary and Dad's pension. She lived so modestly," Mike added, shaking his head in amazement. "We never imagined she had this kind of money available for charitable giving. It makes me feel like we didn't really know her at all." The realization that Mom had been living far below her means in order to support both her family and her scholarship recipients added another layer to our understanding of her character and values. She could have afforded a nicer house, better cars, more expensive vacations, but she'd chosen to use her resources to create opportunities for others instead. During the reception, Sarah Chen approached me with an announcement that brought tears to my eyes. She'd been promoted at her tech company and wanted to establish her own scholarship fund to support other foster care alumni pursuing computer science degrees. Mom's generosity was already inspiring the next generation of giving, creating a ripple effect that would extend far beyond her original investment. "I want to call it the Patricia Hamilton Legacy Scholarship," Sarah said. "Your mother gave me a future, and now I want to give other kids the same chance she gave me. It feels like the best way to honor her memory and continue her work." The evening was filled with similar moments of connection and inspiration. Former scholarship recipients talked about their careers and families, current students shared their academic goals and dreams, and everyone expressed gratitude for the woman they'd never met but who had changed their lives through her quiet generosity. As the reception wound down, I found myself standing in the same spot where I'd delivered Mom's eulogy just 8 months earlier. The grief that had defined those early weeks after her death had evolved into something more complex and ultimately more sustaining, a deep appreciation for the kind of person she'd been, and a commitment to continuing the work she'd found so meaningful. The secret bank account that had initially threatened to divide our family had ultimately revealed the full scope of Mom's generosity and wisdom. She'd supported her children according to their individual needs, established a scholarship program that transformed lives, and left behind a legacy of giving that would continue for generations. Most importantly, she'd taught us that financial resources were tools for creating positive change rather than just personal security. 2 years after discovering the secret account, I was running both a successful consulting business and an expanded scholarship foundation that supported twice as many students as Mom's original program. The money she'd left me had provided the foundation for both endeavors, giving me the financial freedom to take risks and pursue meaningful work rather than just paying bills. The family relationships that had been strained by the initial revelation of Mom's secret giving had become stronger than ever. We now gathered regularly not just for holidays and birthdays, but also for foundation events and volunteer activities. Mike had become involved in the foundation's mentoring program, using his construction experience to help students with hands-on learning opportunities. Amanda contributed her nursing expertise to health and wellness workshops for scholarship recipients. Dad had perhaps been most transformed by learning about the full scope of Mom's philanthropic work. He'd always known she was generous and caring, but discovering the systematic way she'd used their resources to create opportunities for others had inspired him to become more actively involved in charitable giving himself. He now served on the foundation's board of directors and frequently spoke about Mom's vision at community events. The memorial jewelry I'd received that first day after the service now sat on my desk at the foundation office, a daily reminder of the woman whose quiet wisdom had shaped so many lives. The simple silver chain and pearl earrings might not have been valuable in monetary terms, but they represented something far more precious, the knowledge that love and generosity could take many forms, and that sometimes the most meaningful gifts were the ones that opened doors for others. Mom's secret had been bigger than any of us had imagined, encompassing not just a bank account with my name on it, but an entire philosophy of using financial resources to create positive change in the world. She'd seen money not as something to be hoarded or displayed, but as a tool for providing opportunities, solving problems, and building a better future for the next generation. The revelation of her secret giving had taught our family important lessons about the different ways people express love and support. More importantly, it had shown us that true generosity often happens quietly, without recognition or fanfare, motivated by the simple desire to make life better for others. Mom's legacy wasn't just the money she'd saved or the scholarships she'd funded, but the example she'd set for how to live a life of purpose and meaning. 5 years after that first shocking discovery at the bank, the Patricia Hamilton Educational Foundation had grown into a significant force for good in our community, supporting dozens of students and inspiring other families to establish their own giving programs. The secret account that had once threatened to tear us apart had become the foundation for bringing us together in service to others. The memorial service that began this journey had been intended to celebrate Mom's life, but it had become something more, the starting point for a family's commitment to continuing her work and expanding her impact. Her final gift hadn't just been financial security for me, it had been the knowledge that each of us had the power to make a difference in other people's lives, and the inspiration to use that power wisely and generously. Standing in the foundation office late one evening, looking at the wall of photos showing scholarship recipients at their graduations, I finally understood what Mom had been trying to teach us all along. True wealth wasn't measured by what you accumulated, but by what you made possible for others. The secret she'd kept for so many years wasn't really about money at all, it was about the responsibility that comes with having resources and the joy that comes from using them to create opportunities for others to succeed. The family crisis that had seemed so devastating in those first weeks after the revelation had ultimately become the catalyst for our greatest growth and closest connections. Mom's secret had taught us that love sometimes requires difficult decisions and uncomfortable revelations, but that truth and transparency, even when painful, were the foundation for genuine understanding and lasting relationships. The inheritance I'd received had given me far more than financial security, it had given me a purpose and a mission that connected me to something larger than myself. Mom's final gift had been the knowledge that I was capable of continuing her work, and the confidence to build on the foundation she'd established. In the end, that was the most valuable inheritance of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.